This is TWiT.
The federal government, of course, the different agencies that are all tasked with different things, be it defense or revenue or what have you, they all are looking to the commercial marketplace for help in making sure that sort of their AI chops are up to what they should be. And a really interesting profile in Protocol was just recently completed. In fact, I believe just this morning. So joining us to talk about this story is the writer, Kaye. Welcome to Tech News Weekly, Kate.
Thanks so much.
Yes, happy to have you here. So one of the things that kind of kicked off this story was this National Defense Authorization Act of 2022. I was hoping that you could give the listeners just sort of a brief understanding of what the National Defense Authorization Act is and kind of how that plays into what is going on between AI companies and the federal government.
Right. Okay. Well, I want to just lay it out here that I'm not a defense reporter, so my knowledge of this is really based on the fact that it's affecting enterprise AI companies and commercial AI companies that want to get military contracts. So what people really need to understand about that act is that it basically did two things. It called on the Secretary of Defense to basically put out a report or sort of compile some information to say, hey, here's how we'd like to use artificial intelligence and machine learning software, analytics software, things like that in all these different facets of what the Defense Department does. So not just the stuff that we think about when we think about military, like, drone technology or things like that, but really more mundane businessy stuff like, how they use analytics and AI in their human resources, in healthcare, in logistics, in predicting when they need to repair a part of equipment. And so that was one thing that it did. And then the second thing that it did that has potentially really important implications for enterprise AI companies like C3 AI in particular is that it basically streamlined the procurement process for tech software, for AI software. Typically when any federal agency, defense for one, wants to use any kind of tech, they have to go through this bidding process. They've got to put out a request for proposal there's a whole long kind of process involved. And this basically said, hey, we're going to make it a lot easier for any person within the DoD to use commercial AI technologies.
Okay. So that's what's kind of interesting about this is that it's almost both of the sides sort of being ready for one another. You talk about C3.ai saying, look, we are really trying to get involved in this. And in the past, it's maybe been more difficult, but because of this Defense Act coming at the same time, then both sides kind of get to work with one another. Speaking of C3.ai, I was hoping you could give us just what has C3 AI done up to this point? And then do we know kind of what are the different things, the different roles that it's going to be playing with the government now that it does have a contract with the government?
Yeah, well, they've already had contracts with the government over the past at least few years, if not more. C3 AI is, one of many companies that is really going after defense industry work, one of many enterprise AI companies that also do work with, everyday businesses. And so C3 AI, they already have stuff underway with, I'm actually looking at a list because like I said, I'm not a defense industry reporter. So I'm like, okay, the Missile Defense Agency, which is basically the Space Force. It's like a subsidiary, as I understand, of the Space Force. They work with them on aircraft maintenance. So you've got like these planes that might be used for surveillance, and they help those planes. They help determine when parts need to be repaired for those planes, for example. And then they've also got a contract that they've done with looking at ballistic missile performance. And, you know, they've got a contract with the Counterintelligence and Security Agency. And that was just announced. It might have been announced before this, but the CEO of C3 AI, Thomas Seibel, who's kind of a bit of a star in the world of enterprise AI in his own way, he talked about that contract in their recent earnings report last week, and really talked up how they're really going after defense industry contracts. And again, this company also wants to work with everyday business people. So it's I think that dynamic's really important to think about, and that's why this story really touches on what that all means and how they play.
Now, you mentioned in your piece that, and you briefly touched on it there at the top, that the Department of Defense kind of had hesitancy in wanting to use these commercial companies because of all of the red tape, if you will, leading up to that. And that act has helped kind of smooth that over. I was hoping, as far as that goes, like, what is it that there's not as much testing now? Do these companies just get to swing in and do their thing? Is it that before, that they've realized now that it was just prohibitively involved in order for these companies to work? I mean, are we getting less tested programs being used by the military and other parts of the government? What has changed so much with the Department of Defense that these, from your perspective on the side of looking at the commercial AI companies, they're now able to swing in and be there kind of quicker than they were before?
Yeah, there's actually two different things that I think might be being conflated here.
Okay.
So it's definitely important to know that the process for procuring and using these commercial AI technologies is faster now and more streamlined as a result of that act we talked about. But separately, this idea that testing and evaluation of software, like AI software, is necessary, that's actually something that apparently, according to one of the key people at the Joint AI Center within the DoD that's really kind of overseeing a lot of this stuff, she's said, her name is Jane Pinellas, she's said in the past that, DoD leaders have kind of pushed back on testing and evaluation of AI. It's not that they didn't want to use it. It's that, they want to deploy it. They want they want to speed it up. So, and she is one of the people who is saying part of what we want to do by using these enterprise AI companies and by making it easier to work with them is actually going to enable more testing and evaluation and more kind of operationalizing the kind of testing and evaluation that should be really is very important when it comes to AI use within the machine learning operations process, within the process of how they're going to use this stuff. So it's like this is kind of facilitating arguably more ethical approaches and just making sure that, and in the defense, world, they talk about this is going to make our systems more robust. It's actually going to enable asymmetric, basically more leadership and more capability for the U.S. defense to just be better than others, be better against our adversaries. That's what they're arguing. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes perfect sense. The other thing, and I think, the headline touches on this and sort of throughout the piece, you are discussing kind of the disconnect there, or if not disconnect, the sort of optics of this situation. I'm curious, with these companies, at times, depending on who you're talking to, if you're talking to a large group of people on Twitter versus individuals, companies working with the military in particular, not just the federal government as a whole, but the military in particular, that can kind of be seen as a negative thing. We've seen Microsoft have to deal with that in the past. I think Google, lots of different companies. Why do you think companies are still going after these military contracts, despite the fact that the optics there might be a little bit tumultuous?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is because they have different audiences, or sort of, like you said, you've got the Twitterverse, or you've got maybe employees within certain companies that have been very vocal and loud about being against the use of AI for military applications. And some people even in everyday business, a source that I talked to for this story who did not want to go on the record said, I'm not going to talk about this. My company has nothing to do with killer robots. Now that's the term that gets thrown around. I mean, I'm calling it killer robot optics. That's kind of that was the first thing that popped in my head when I started thinking more about all of these contracts that these enterprise AI companies are establishing with the military. And so you've got that as the context, as sort of the zeitgeist from more the mainstream understanding of how we think about this stuff. But then you've got the business realities. And when you talk to people in the business world, including a source who I spoke with from a company called Monitor, which monitors AI, he said, I think the quote was, I'm pretty darn sure these companies think this is good for business. And what he meant was getting a federal contract and basically going through the process, even though the procurement's faster now, or will be with some of these companies, they still had to go through a lot, like a year's worth of vetting before they got the okay for the DoD to now more easily work with them. That's, so that's basically, according to the source of mine, hey, this is giving a potential customer sort of another validation point that this is a company that they're good enough for the federal government. They're good enough for me, kind of a thing.
Understood.
So arguably it's better. It's good for them possibly in the long run when it comes to wanting to work with healthcare companies, telcos, the automotive industry, all these other industries that they want to work with. And C3 AI, for example, which has really, really pushed defense more than some of these other companies, they're advertising on NPR every day. I'm an NPR nerd, sort of. I hear their ads, their sponsorship messages every day on NPR. They want to reach everyday business people. So, it's potentially a dichotomy or potentially something that benefits them.
That makes sense.
We don't know.
Yeah, that sort of, hey, look, we made it here, so I think we can definitely handle whatever you've got for us. That part makes sense for sure. Honestly, I think you covered everything there, particularly with the point you brought up about sort of killer robot optics. That, of course, whenever you hear AI and military in the same sentence, you're thinking robotic dogs with brains that are comparable to our own. But a lot of times these AI companies are just working, as you mentioned in your piece, on maintenance stuff, not necessarily the next set of drones or things like that. So that context is important. Everyone should go read your piece over on protocol.com. I am currently on the lookout for your punk rock cookie book. I would love to get that.
No longer available, unfortunately. It was published years ago.
Got to check on eBay or something.
It was called Cookie Chaos.
So cool. So cool. If folks want to follow you online, though, where should they go to do so?
Kate Kaye Reports. KATEKAYE Reports.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much.